I'm starting to feel a little bit nervous because if you know, I've kind of been under wraps for a while. This is my first time out.
They postponed the release of this movie for an entire year, and not because of reshoots, budget issues, or post-production delays. The reason, according to insiders, was far more alarming for Disney. Their leading lady, Rachel Zegler, had become too unlikable. What was once marketed as a bold and empowering reimagining of a beloved fairy tale had spiraled into one of the most disastrous PR crises in Disney's modern history. The company that built its empire on wholesome, family-friendly storytelling suddenly found itself battling a narrative of arrogance, disrespect, and fan betrayal, all centered around one of its most iconic characters, Snow White. When the project was first announced, excitement was sky high. The idea of a live-action Snow White seemed like an obvious win. Disney had already struck gold with remakes like Cinderella and Beauty and the Beast, and executives believed this would be the crown jewel, a dazzling revival of the film that started it all. But that optimism didn't last long. By the time Rachel Zegler began her press tour, the tide had already started to turn. One remark, one clip, and one viral moment changed everything. During an interview meant to celebrate the legacy of the original film, Zegler looked directly into the camera and said, "It's not 1937 anymore." On paper, it was a simple statement. But in tone, it sounded like a dismissal, a rejection of the very foundation on which Disney built its legacy. Fans didn't hear progress. They heard contempt. It wasn't just a critique of old-fashioned storytelling. It felt like an attack on nostalgia itself. And for millions of Disney loyalists, that was unforgivable. Clips of her interviews spread across social media like wildfire. Commentators dissected every word. Fans created compilations comparing her tone to classic Disney heroines, and hashtags like "Not My Snow White" and "Fire Rachel Zegler" trended for weeks. What should have been a routine publicity run turned into a digital witch hunt. Critics accused Zegler of being condescending and self-righteous. Even those who supported modern reinterpretations of fairy tales began questioning whether she had gone too far. And instead of damage control, things got worse. In later interviews, Zegler doubled down on her comments, saying Snow White wouldn't need a man to save her, and referring to the prince as someone who literally stalks her. What she likely meant as a feminist perspective came across as scornful, almost mocking toward the generations who adored the story. The internet erupted. Memes, reaction videos, and even parody edits flooded TikTok and YouTube, painting Zegler as the face of Hollywood's growing disconnect with its audience. Behind the scenes, Disney was in crisis mode. Executives began holding emergency meetings to assess the fallout. According to whispers from inside the company, the situation was described as a full-blown brand emergency. Some higher-ups feared that releasing the film as planned could result in catastrophic box office numbers. Bob Iger, Disney's CEO, reportedly intervened personally, instructing teams to pause the release and reconsider the marketing strategy entirely. There were even murmurs of drastic measures. Some executives pushed for a total recast, proposing that Disney pay Zegler a hefty settlement to quietly walk away from the project. The studio had already sunk millions into production, but the fear of long-term reputational damage outweighed the financial loss. One insider allegedly described the mood inside Disney as borderline panic, saying they didn't just lose control of the film, they lost control of the narrative. Meanwhile, the backlash continued to snowball. Fans accused Disney of betraying its own identity, of allowing political messaging and modern activism to overshadow timeless storytelling. For decades, Snow White symbolized innocence, kindness, and hope, values that transcended generations. Now, those same themes were being dismissed as outdated, even problematic, by the actress chosen to embody them. The disconnect was staggering. As months passed, the controversy refused to fade. Every time Rachel Zegler's name resurfaced, the same clips went viral again, reigniting the outrage. Public sentiment toward the project grew so negative that industry analysts began predicting one of Disney's worst box office openings in history. Merchandising plans were quietly scaled back, promotional material was delayed, and fan screenings were canceled. What should have been a celebratory remake had transformed into a ticking time bomb. Even Zegler's defenders struggled to shift the narrative. They argued that her comments were taken out of context or that she was being unfairly targeted online. But by then, the damage was done. The cultural moment had passed her by, and the internet had made up its mind. In the eyes of the public, Rachel Zegler wasn't just a controversial actress. She had become the symbol of everything fans felt was wrong with Disney's new direction. Internally, Disney's marketing teams faced an impossible challenge. How do you sell a film when your lead star has alienated the audience? Some proposed pivoting the focus toward the film's visuals or music, while others suggested downplaying Ziegler's presence in trailers altogether. But every attempt to course-correct felt too little, too late. For Rachel Zegler, the fallout was career-defining. Once hailed as a rising star with a promising future after West Side Story, she now faced an uncertain path. Her social media presence became quieter, her interviews more cautious, and her public image deeply tarnished. Insiders suggested that casting directors began to distance themselves, wary of the controversy that seemed to follow her name. In the end, what should have been a fairy tale comeback for Disney turned into a cautionary tale about arrogance, overconfidence, and losing touch with your audience. Snow White was meant to celebrate Disney's roots. Instead, it exposed how far the company had drifted from them. The studio that once created magic was now scrambling to rebuild trust, and the actress who was supposed to bring a beloved character to life found herself at the center of one of Hollywood's most talked-about collapses. Disney's mistake wasn't just in miscasting a role, it was in misunderstanding what fans truly wanted. They didn't want politics. They didn't want lectures. They wanted wonder, nostalgia, and a story that made them believe in happily ever after. But as the dust settles, one truth remains painfully clear. When the person playing the princess stops believing in the fairy tale, the magic dies, and no amount of Disney sparkle can bring it back. An elite actress seemingly determined to burn a legacy to the ground. That's how many began describing Rachel Zegler as the Snow White controversy deepened. At first, she seemed defiant, brushing off criticism with an air of superiority. But as the backlash reached a boiling point, her tone shifted dramatically. Gone was the sharp-edged confidence. In its place appeared a cautious, rehearsed humility. Suddenly, Rachel was posting carefully worded statements about how much she loved Disney and respected the legacy of the character. She shared childhood photos of herself dressed as Disney princesses, claiming her past remarks had been taken out of context. But to the public, it was far too late. Fans saw through it instantly. The shift didn't feel sincere. It looked corporate, calculated, like damage control scripted by a PR team in panic mode. The once fiery actress now seemed like a puppet reading from a studio memo, trying desperately to stop the bleeding. And just when things seemed to be settling down, she managed to reignite the chaos all over again. Moments after posting her "Yay, I love Snow White" tweet, Zegler followed it with a sudden and politically charged Free Palestine message, right in the middle of Disney's most sensitive global marketing campaign. Executives were blindsided. The post sent shockwaves through the company's PR department, which was already struggling to contain the fallout from her earlier comments. And then, before the situation could cool, Zegler gave another controversial interview, this time accusing the West Side Story set, her breakout project, of being filled with white supremacists. Steven Spielberg's team, according to industry whispers, was completely blindsided and furious. What had once been bad press was now crossing the line into outright toxicity. The backlash exploded. Every new trailer, teaser, or promotional post for Snow White was immediately flooded with angry comments. Hashtags like "Don't Boycott Disney" and "Not My Snow White" surged across social media. But by now, the anger wasn't just directed at Zegler, it had turned toward Disney itself. Fans saw the film as the latest example of the studio rewriting beloved classics in the name of forced progressiveness. For many, it was the final straw. What they saw didn't help. The dwarfs were gone, replaced with CGI magical creatures. The prince, traditionally a key part of the story, was practically erased, rewritten into a side character to fit a new modern message. The very heart of Snow White was being gutted in real time, and fans could hardly recognize the fairy tale they'd loved for generations. Online commentators began repeating a phrase that Disney had hoped would die out: "Go woke, go broke." It wasn't just a meme anymore. It was starting to look like a prophecy. Meanwhile, Zegler herself kept making things worse. In one interview, she complained about her working conditions, saying that if she was in the Snow White dress for 18 hours, she expected to be paid for 18 hours. The comment might have sounded reasonable in isolation, but coming from an actress reportedly earning millions, it struck a nerve. I'm thinking about her tonight, and I'm thinking about all of you who make the choice. Viewers called her ungrateful, arrogant, and entitled, traits already associated with her since the controversy began. Even her defenders started backing away, unable to justify her repeated missteps. Within Hollywood, the whispers grew louder. Executives and insiders began labeling her as difficult, saying she was two and done, meaning she'd already burned through her goodwill after just 2 major roles. Casting directors reportedly started distancing themselves, and projects that once seemed like guaranteed hits were now quietly moving on without her. Zegler, once hailed as a breakout star with limitless potential, was suddenly radioactive. Even her co-stars weren't immune to the tension. Gal Gadot, who played the evil queen, kept her head down through the entire media storm, avoiding the controversy entirely. But behind the scenes, insiders claimed the relationship between Gadot and Zegler had become strained. Some sources alleged that Gadot was embarrassed by Zegler's behavior during interviews and press events, while others believed Disney deliberately reduced Gadot's visibility in marketing materials to protect her image from being tainted by association. For Disney, the damage was immense. What was meant to be a triumphant retelling of a timeless story had become a nightmare. A project defined not by its artistry or innovation, but by controversy, division, and backlash. The film's message of empowerment had been overshadowed by the star's tone-deaf arrogance, and no amount of PR could fix it. Rachel Zegler had gone from being Disney's next princess to one of the most polarizing figures in Hollywood. A cautionary tale of how quickly fame can turn to infamy when ego, politics, and corporate pressure collide. And as fans turned away and critics mocked what Snow White had become, one truth became painfully clear. Disney didn't just lose control of a movie, they lost control of the magic itself. The contrast between Gal Gadot's calm professionalism and Rachel Zegler's chaotic, unpredictable presence only made the situation worse. Gadot handled the controversy with silence and grace, refusing to engage in drama or online debates, while Zegler seemed to ignite a new firestorm every time she opened her mouth. The dynamic between the two became symbolic. One actress holding her composure, while the other spiraled publicly. And as the film's release date crept closer, Disney's anxiety reached new heights. Inside the company, the atmosphere was tense. Executives were holding daily meetings, analyzing social media trends in real time. Every post, every reaction mattered. This wasn't just about box office returns anymore. This was about saving face. Disney had poured hundreds of millions into Snow White, and now the fate of that investment seemed to hinge on a single piece of marketing: the final trailer. When it finally dropped, the studio watched the public response like hawks. They weren't just counting views. They were counting hearts, likes, dislikes, and comments. Insiders described it as a make-or-break moment. If the trailer flopped, it wouldn't just mean bad numbers, it would mean reputational collapse. Disney's leadership knew that if they couldn't turn public perception around, not only could Snow White bomb, but future live-action remakes might be put on ice altogether. At first, there was a glimmer of hope. Some viewers praised the visuals and expressed excitement about a modern take on the story. A handful of loyal fans even defended Rachel Zegler's interpretation of Snow White as a strong, independent heroine. But for every supportive comment, there were 10 more attacking her. People flooded the comment sections with criticism, mocking Disney's direction and demanding that Zegler be recast. "She hates Snow White," one user wrote. "She mocked the prince. She mocked love. Why would anyone want to watch her play a character she clearly despises?" Others accused Disney of rewriting history, claiming that the studio was so focused on being progressive that it had lost sight of what made these stories timeless in the first place. And then came the biggest shock of all: the dwarfs. When news broke that the iconic 7 dwarfs would be either heavily altered or replaced by CGI magical creatures, fans erupted in outrage. The studio tried to frame the change as an effort toward inclusivity and sensitivity, but audiences didn't buy it. These weren't just minor side characters, they were the heart and soul of the original Snow White and the 7 dwarfs. Their personalities, quirks, and bond with Snow White were what gave the story its warmth. Removing or reinventing them felt like ripping the heart out of the film. How do you tell Snow White and the 7 dwarfs without the dwarfs? Fans asked across social media platforms. Memes, parodies, and videos mocked Disney's decision, and even some industry critics began questioning whether the studio understood its audience at all anymore. It wasn't just backlash, it was disappointment. Generations of fans who had grown up with Disney's magic were now watching it unravel in real time. Inside the company, morale reportedly sank. The once bright promise of Snow White had turned into a source of dread. Marketing teams struggled to find the right messaging, publicists begged Rachel Zegler to stay quiet, and executives debated delaying the film again, but the momentum was already gone. Every attempt to revive enthusiasm was met with skepticism and sarcasm. In the end, it became clear that this controversy had grown far beyond one actress or one movie. It wasn't just about Rachel Zegler's arrogance or Disney's questionable creative choices. It was about a larger identity crisis. Fans were asking a painful question. Can Disney remake its classics without destroying what made them magical in the first place? The studio had built its empire on dreams, wonder, and heart. But somewhere along the way, in its pursuit of reinvention, it seemed to have lost its soul. And as the storm around Snow White raged on, one truth became impossible to ignore. No matter how modern or updated Disney tried to make it, audiences didn't want a reimagined Snow White. They wanted the one who believed in kindness, love, and happily ever after. This was never just about a movie, it was about Disney's soul. A studio built on fairy tales, dreams, and timeless magic now found itself torn between two worlds. One that wanted progress, reinvention, and modern storytelling, and another that simply wanted to preserve the heart and innocence that had made Disney special in the first place. The Snow White controversy became more than a PR issue. It became a reflection of Disney's growing identity crisis. For decades, Disney represented wonder, the belief that love conquers evil, kindness triumphs over cruelty, and that happy endings still matter. But now, those same values were being questioned, reinterpreted, or even dismissed as outdated. The company that once inspired generations to believe in magic was now struggling to believe in itself. And at the center of it all stood Rachel Zegler. She became the face, and the cautionary tale, of everything fans feared about modern Hollywood. Arrogance mistaken for confidence, entitlement disguised as empowerment, and a lack of respect for the stories that shaped millions of childhoods. What was supposed to be a dream role for a young actress became the turning point of her career, one that might define her for years to come, but not in the way anyone expected. Zegler's rise had been meteoric, from her breakthrough in West Side Story to being handpicked by Disney to lead one of its most beloved tales. But her fall was just as swift. The very qualities that once made her seem bold and outspoken had turned against her. What fans once saw as bravery, they now saw as arrogance. What once sounded like confidence now came across as contempt. And by the time she tried to course correct, it was too late. The audience had moved on, and the trust was gone. As the dust settles, one truth stands unshakable. This version of Snow White will go down in history, but not for the reasons Disney dreamed of. Instead of being remembered as a triumphant reimagining of a classic, it will be remembered as a turning point, the moment fans realized that even the most powerful studio in Hollywood could lose touch with its magic. For Disney, it's a hard lesson. For Zegler, it's a crossroads. The question now isn't whether she'll recover, it's whether anyone in Hollywood will still be willing to bet on her after this. The fairy tale that began with so much promise ended with a very different kind of moral. In the age of social media and instant backlash, one careless word can turn dreams into dust. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories just like this. And drop a comment below to let us know what you think about Disney's Snow White disaster and the downfall of Rachel Zegler.